Hello, thanks for listening to the Finance Leadership Podcast. It's the latest update on the news about the Finance Leadership Programme. It's produced by AICPA and CIMA together as the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more at AICPA-CIMA.com or enroll.cgma.org. As usual, you listen to myself, Kevin Gormley, and today I'm joined by Thomas Broadley. So, Thomas, would you be able to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do and who you are, Astranti, please?
Of course. Thank you very much for having me. So, as you said, my name is Thomas Broadley, and I've been working at Astranti for around 6 years or so. Astranti itself is an accountancy training, or it's a bit more diversified now, but originally it was an accountancy training business, been around for around 20 years or so, focusing on CIMA. We used to specialize primarily in case study training, as I'm sure some of your listeners at least hopefully will have heard of. But over the years, we developed our objective test materials, and then more recently, over the last couple of years, or certainly since the beginning of last year and a little before that, we've got into the financial leadership program ourselves. I myself started out 6 years ago, all those years ago, doing content work for Astranti, writing materials and such, and then I've gone on to do a range of other things, including marking mock exams, just I should say, not the real thing, writing mock exams, various other case study pieces, as well as other positions in terms of customer service, student mentoring, and now managing the accountancy training division for the company.
So Astranti is one of our partners for the Finance Leadership Programme, and you came on board last year?
Late 2022, I think.
So in terms of partner with CIMA on this product, I mean, you guys took that decision. Obviously, you have some unique features and you have your own target market. But what was your main reasons for that, and what's unique about what you offer that's based on FLP, and what do you offer students?
Well, there's a bit of crossover in those answers, I suppose. But as to why we wanted to partner, why we were eager to and tried to get in there as early as possible, was because we saw that FLP was a very quickly growing part of the CIMA student base. A lot of students across the world, or at least where it had been released in other markets, were very happy with it, and it was growing there. And we anticipated the same for when it was released in the UK. So no, we were very eager to join the sort of growing segment of CIMA students. But in terms of what we bring to it as a sort of a unique part of CIMA, and also part of the reason we wanted to join as well, is so we could bring this uniqueness, is I suppose our approach to teaching, which tends to break things down a little bit more than some other providers. And, different providers will have different styles, but one of the things we've always tried to do is make learning complex topics as simple as possible, which for the FLP I think is quite useful because, of course, CIMA has a very good platform, a lot of information on there, but it's mostly textual, for instance, a few videos from time to time, but primarily textual learning. So our approach often involves video content, which I know a lot of students prefer to learn through just because they prefer listening to things or seeing something moving on the screen, that sort of thing. So I think it was just about bringing a bit more variety to the teaching style as well. In terms of sort of the particular Astranti style, breaking down jargon, a lot of illustrative examples, those sorts of things. And one of the other things that we've brought to FLP is installment payments. So one of the reservations people had about joining FLP was that it's the upfront cost. Now, overall, it actually works out, I believe, a bit cheaper than, say, if you were to go through full courses throughout your objective test route. But in terms of an upfront cost, it can be quite daunting to join the FLP. So we've introduced a sort of installment payment plan to try and break that down a bit, just to make it a bit more accessible. So it's one of the things, again, that we tried on other parts of CIMA that seemed to be quite popular and seemed to be quite helpful for widening access, and something we thought that we could bring to the FLP.
Yeah, I think the affordability offer is definitely something that no one else is doing in the UK right now. So I'm right in assuming the vast majority of your students are B2C students?
A lot of them, we have seen, I'd say, an increase in B2B students for the FLP. I think just because maybe there are fewer providers, or again, maybe our particular offering as a style of premium course, not the premium course, but an advanced FLP course, I think appeals to some employers. But primarily our students, as you say, are B2C customers.
They're B2C, but in the world we're in, a lot of that is B2C to B. So, I mean, they end up getting a refund from their employer or the money back in some way, even though they make the transaction themselves quite often. So it's just the nature of the professional accountancy body market that people claim back the expenses for professional exams. So you come on board with FLP, and has it changed your operating business model much? Have you seen big changes internally or how you operate?
Not as much as we'd thought it might be, to be honest. So we were looking at FLP almost replacing entirely the objective test route as something that people would exclusively do going forward. But Actually, and while it has been growing, we've actually seen a sort of a steady, if not increase, and certainly a steady level of objective test students still coming to us. So I think it's not necessarily completely removing the other route or diminishing it. I think it's just maybe bringing new people to do CIMA that might not have been doing it. For instance, I mean, I have myself, whilst I manage the division, I also occasionally do one-to-ones with prospective students, give demonstrations of the FLP platform. It gives me a bit of first-hand knowledge of what students are coming to us with. And one of the things I often see is people that have got, say, I mean, sometimes a decade or more of experience in industry, but maybe they haven't got any qualifications, formal qualifications or management accounting qualifications because they didn't need it at the start. They've kind of built up their experience, but now they've hit a bit of a ceiling without a qualification. And where before that would have been quite a few exams, a real lengthy process, now they can, of course, do the FLP, which is a very different kind of route where they can leverage a bit more of their experiential knowledge and they can bring that into their assessments, which I think makes it a bit more accessible for them. And we're seeing the same with B2B students as well. So people coming to us who are working for companies, I think they're a bit more eager to go for the FLP because I think it's a bit more of a steady route. In terms of our business model, we're seeing, I suppose, an increase in FLP, but also continuing objective test or, professional qualification route students, which, yeah, we hadn't expected. We'd expected more of a sort of seesaw motion with one going up and the other going down.
There's different courses for students and different pathways. So I suppose one thing we've done is we've given people choice now to choose the pathway that suits their particular needs best. I think the affordability issue is, for some students, is clearly a concern. We've seen a really big increase in the number of case study exams being taken by FLP students. So the nature of that and the way the pathway works, you would expect that. We are seeing a generally steady increase in FLP students in terms of the percentage of students who are studying through this pathway. But obviously we also have apprenticeship, which is a big pathway for us. We have given students choice, and I guess some people are choosing what best suits their needs for that particular time, which is good. It's a healthy thing to do. We are seeing a steady increase because obviously when we launched in the UK, we had a massive intake of students in the UK, which is one of our biggest markets. But since then, we have seen a continual increase, maybe not as huge as you might have expected in early doors. But obviously, there's a lot of people still maybe not aware of FLP. I don't know how, but...
You say that, but I think that is one of the challenges. I mean, with FLP, of course, they can't get trial access to the platform. So knowing what they're in for, I think, is one of the challenges. That's why we hold our one-to-one demonstration sessions. So we've got a test account that we can show people through and just show them the style of learning, what they'd be in for. Because it's that big upfront cost, people are very nervous about investing in it without knowing, actually, is this for me? Am I going to be able to learn effectively with the style of teaching that they're going to be giving me? So I think there is still a fair amount of people still asking questions before they can get into the FLP and kind of commit to it.
Yeah. No, you don't want buyer's remorse when you're paying upfront as a student. So most students are very, very positive about their time on FLP. Have you seen the same?
Very much so. I mean, we hold surveys from time to time with our students, and I was looking up our survey results, and our 2024 survey, when students were asked to rate their happiness with FLP after having joined it on a scale of 1 to 5, the average was 4.77. So overwhelmingly, it was very positive sentiments towards the FLP, which obviously we were ecstatic to see.
Oh, that's great. And then one of the things we always hear is, no, it suits my lifestyle better. I'm working full time. I want to study whilst I work. Have you been getting feedback around how it helps with those elements of day-to-day living?
I mean, that's one of the big things I'd say is that people are saying that it does fit much better around both their work and their private lives. In terms of the speed at which people progress, and I think that's one of the questions I get most often when I'm talking to prospective students and current students really, is how quickly do people progress? And the average is somewhere around 6 months per level, including the case study, but it varies so significantly between students because, of course, it depends on how much time they have per week to put into going through the topics or how quickly they can get through the topics. Some people, if they get to an assessment, they're actually going to take quite a while to get through it because they're really struggling to remember the particular calculation or something. And others go through it right away because they've got a very, maybe a stronger memory or something. So in terms of the speed at which people progress, it does vary quite a lot within that sort of average of 6 months. But a number of people have asked, could they complete CIMA in 1 year? And I would say it's theoretically possible, but very unlikely. And ultimately, it's probably not the right approach to try and do it that quickly, I tend to think. I think there's such a thing as going too quickly, which I know is not necessarily what they want to hear because, of course, they're paying on a 12-monthly subscription, so they want to get as much out of those 12 months as they can. But one of the things we've seen in terms of results as well is that people that I'd say rush through their competency learning do tend to struggle a lot more with the case studies than those who take a bit more time, not necessarily go slowly, but just take their time and really focus on the learning aspect assessments rather than just completing them to get them out of the way.
Just on that, though, we've done a bit of research recently analysing student performance and how students are engaging with the platform. So one thing we did find, and this is to be expected clearly, but the data analysis has helped us firm our assumptions, is that, students who finish maybe 7 weeks before their case study preparation in terms of the level learning are twice as likely to pass a respective case study than those who maybe right up to the last minute. So some students on the platform think, well, I can run on the level learning right up and at the same time study from a case study. If you do that, there's chances of passing half. So it's a very clear indicator that finishing on time, doing your case study preparation that you guys will deliver to those students is an extremely important function of preparing yourself for the case study in the best way. So not doing things on the quick, as you say, you've said it a few times now, Thomas, I think it's very, very important.
As I say, I was doing one of these one-to-ones earlier this morning, and on the FLP platform, on the dashboard, you see that there's a thing that says, as long as you complete all your competencies 2 weeks before the exam, there's no problem. And I always give them the same warning, which is do not aim to do that. Always aim to get them done before our course starts, 7 to 8 weeks before the exam. And I would say aim to complete all your competencies before then, because you don't want to be doing the case study studying as well as the competency studying at the same time. Both because that's a lot to take on, but also because trying to do case study preparation, which should be bringing in all the theory that you've learnt so far, while you're still learning the theory, means you're going to be doing it with an incomplete skill set. Whether or not people take that seriously, I hope they do. I feel like saying it does have an impact, because I think otherwise you would naturally assume, oh, if there's the option, you know, that's fine. But no, I think sometimes just giving them that little warning can nudge them in the right direction towards focusing a bit more, and also just again planning to spend a bit more time rather than let's try and join this 2 weeks before the exam and see what I can learn. I mean, we'll help as much as we can. But
yeah, no, absolutely. And the other bit of crucial research we did was we analysed the students who are submitting mock exams versus those who do not. For whatever reason, still a lot of students do not submit mock exams. And those who sat at least one mock exam prior to sitting the case study were twice as likely to pass than those who did not. So obviously, as a tuition provider, mock exams, you would agree, are fundamental to success of the case study.
I would say arguably mock exams are one of the most important preparations that a student can go through for the case study. I mean, obviously reading the pre-scene or analysing the pre-scene, that's, incredibly important. Revising the theory, incredibly important. But mock exams bring all of that together. And I think, getting a mock exam, ideally a marked mock exam as well, so you can get an outside perspective on what you're doing right and ultimately, more importantly, what you're doing wrong, so you can improve. Is incredibly important. But likewise, I will never understand students on our courses that have access to mock exams but choose not to submit them or not to complete them, because ultimately it can be such a help. But obviously, different commitments and their different approaches to the study. That's ultimately, we can lead a horse to mock exams, can't make them drink.
Exactly. I mean, they paid for this. They're studying to be an accountant. You should be looking at return of investment. So quite clearly, practice what you preach in the later life. So it's a bone of contention with us. We try and make this clear to every student, as do our partners and training providers across the globe, but fortunately not all take our advice. Just a quick one on performance of students. So the students who are studying FLP with Astranti at the moment, how's the performance been?
Well, it's difficult to say because we don't have direct access to pass rates for individual students. Fortunately or unfortunately, of course, privacy and all that. But by and large, from what we're seeing from what students are reporting, they're doing on average roughly about the same on average in terms of their rate of passing as those not on the case study. Maybe it's about the same, I'd say. Again, it's rough figures, but that was one of the big fears, again, probably earlier with the release of FLP, particularly in the UK, was that because of the style of learning, students would say rush through, or they would just not take in what they're learning during the assessments. They'd come to the case studies and they'd flounder. And that just hasn't been the case, which was a very big relief for us. But also, I imagine for the students and for CIMA itself, is that, it's evidently an effective way to learn for the case study, which ultimately, despite any criticism might be levelled about sort of the FLP as an alternative approach, which I know has been levelled over sort of the last couple of years, is ultimately case study should have always been the focus, to my mind. And evidently people are passing their case studies, if not at the same level, sometimes even exceeding it.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing people do is they try and compare the objective tests to your assessments from FLP, and they're very different intentionally, because We have students who like OTs. I will never personally understand that because they are a tough exam. And then the less formal iterative nature of the assessment in FLP suits some students much better. They learn better with that type of environment and they retain the knowledge longer. Again, horses for courses, as I said at the start, but they are very different and they're intentionally different. And the other thing to remember is, I'm sure you know this as well, Thomas, is the objective tests and the case study exams have very, very different intentions. They are, honestly, when you have objective tests and they're taught by a third party, CIMA will no doubt have to make sure that the third party teaching that has reached a certain standard and the objective test does that. When you deliver tuition through FLP, then the standard is set by the professional body. So the specific need for OTs could be challenged there because you're in control of the tuition. And that's not any slight on our tuition providers because they all reach a very high standard. But that's part of the argument people have. We're in control of the tuition, we set the standard, and that less formal tuition suits this product much better for its purposes.
I was just going to say as well, I think I made the mistake of looking down lots of Reddit threads a little while ago. I know, like just a bit of a casual research of the industry. I think there's an overwhelming attitude as well that if it's not harder, it's a worse way of learning or a worse way of assessment. So, there's this whole thing about how FLP is easier, and I don't think it always is, to be honest, but ultimately it's almost as if they're looking for, well, how could we possibly make this harder so it's a more worthy assessment? And ultimately that's almost gatekeeping the accountancy industry. It doesn't need to be harder, it needs to be effective and ensuring that you're creating competent accountants, to my mind. And so as long as that's happening with, say, the assessments and with the case study exams, there's no need to aim to make the assessments more difficult or more challenging, as long as students are coming out of it with the requisite knowledge and with the requisite ability.
Yeah, I always think to the scenario of you go and ask a student maybe in 2 or 3 years after completing their studies and becoming a member, can you recite the specifics around certain IFRS standards or IAS standards from the operational level? I could almost bet 95% plus will never remember anything.
I saw that exact same argument even came up in one of these threads, and I thought this was a very refreshing attitude. It was a current CIMA member, and they said that even if there's an argument to be made that people aren't going to remember the material as long as they would with the objective test exams, ultimately any qualified accountant, they said I think it was the capital asset pricing model or something along those lines anyway, and they said ask anyone 6 years after they qualify and they will not remember it. Because they won't, you would look it up, as most qualified accountants will look up something like that. Now, the trick there is that they do know that they need to use the capital asset pricing model, or they would need to know to use a particular model or theory or calculation. And yeah, then they can look it up, as I'm sure is very easy on any given laptop or phone even. And then they can plug it into a spreadsheet quite often.
That is exactly the point of the case study. You know when to do things, you know when to bring in certain tools, techniques, models to get an answer or to recommend something, but you'll not necessarily know all the operational aspects at that given point and on what values to plug in. So law is exactly the same. Get into any law office and there are 500 books behind the solicitor. They don't remember everything about tort or personal compensation law. There's a book for that behind them. Well, there used to be, it's now no longer the case, but it's exactly the same principle. It's about the application, not the real specifics.
And again, this assumes that this is, basically the argument that people aren't remembering, and I genuinely don't agree with that. I feel like the objective test exams are one way, and for some people that would be a much more effective way, but I think for others, as you in fact mentioned earlier, spaced repetition and iterative learning and all these sorts of approaches that you'd get on the FLP might actually be a more effective way of committing these things to memory rather than just cramming it all in, taking an exam, and then possibly even forgetting it after you've taken the exam, you're moving on to the next subject.
Yeah, it's a short-term memory dump, we would refer to it as, where your intention is to remember a lot of information for a specific point in time, and just the way the brain works will not retain that longer term.
Unless you're continually using it, which you might well do, especially if you're working out the area.
Yes.
No, I mean, the one I think of is when I did my certificate exams years ago. I did mine about 6 years ago now. And I've used some of that in the years since. Well, I mean, I've used a lot of it in sort of broader terms, but some parts of it, of course, I haven't touched in 6 years because they haven't come up at the higher levels, or I haven't worked on that specific area. I didn't work on content, for instance, in that area for a while. And yeah, so I would have to revisit it anyway, like any accountant would have to use reference material or go back and check their old textbooks if they've still got them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's an interesting subject, and there's arguments every which way. But I mean, I think the most important thing is we've given choice, we've given options, we have different pathways for students, and they can see fit to choose for whatever they want. But obviously, I come with invested interest in FLP, part of the product team that deliver this to the market. So it's, in my opinion, this is obviously a very good pathway, as many of our TPs who work with us have the same ideas. For anyone who's considering Astranti as a route into FLP, if you have any bits of information you want to give out or anything you want to say around the product?
Well, I suppose if I were to give any sort of tips or advice or anything like that, I suppose one thing I would say is that if you're going into the FLPs, you want to be committed to doing it. I've heard cases of people who join the FLP and they linger a bit, or they aren't really that bothered. And with the objective test route, that's actually quite a good way to do that. If you're on the objective test route, is if you want to do maybe one objective test exam and then give yourself 6 months off, because there's no rush. You can do one and then do another later down the line. As long as you keep your membership active, that's absolutely fine. With the FLP, because it's on a 12-month subscription, ideally you want to have a plan at the outset of how you want to progress. And this isn't to say you want to rush through and try and get as many levels done as possible, but I'd say you want to be committed to continual progress, even if it's slow progress, but you want to be able to continually move through it. That's it. One thing I would say about anyone considering the FLP is make sure you're ready for that. I suppose also in terms of timing as well, just consider your plan ahead of time as how many case studies would fit within the 12 months. So, if it's going to take you a couple of weeks to get onto the FLP and all that, just consider when the case studies sit, and will that fit within the 12 months? For instance, if you were to join now for the FLP, 12 months would take you just before the August exams next year, which if you're planning to do your SCS next year, for instance, that might then leave you a bit short. So plan that ahead of time, I'd say, is always a good one. And discuss with whichever training provider you go with, just consider which will work best for your plans. One other thing as well, and I think we've kind of covered this a bit, is don't rush the assessments. Don't try and get through. I think this just generally is something that should go out to everyone, is don't rush the FLP. Never rush your studies, because it will come back to bite you when you come to do your case study, or even down the line further when you're trying to remember your variance analyses from P1 and you're coming on to do sort of later levels and try to remember how that all works. It's going to definitely come back to bite you.
Yeah.
Mentioned about sort of giving 7 to 8 weeks for case study, which I think is, again, vitally important. Don't rush that. Don't rush anything, really.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And then, just consider what your priorities are. For instance, if you're worried about not having videos and such, try and find a tuition provider like Astranti, maybe. I know vested interest and all that, but try and find a tuition provider that can cater for that, because there are a few of us out there at the moment. Same with installment payments, things like that. Just try and find one that will suit your learning style, and make sure to have conversations with your learning providers as well, because you just want to find out that it'll be a good fit for you, because it's a big commitment.
Yeah, that's some good advice. And in particular, the choosing when you start. So you don't pick a subscription in the middle of an exam window and then realize when you get the SCS that you're 2 days short from studying your SCS.
I suppose that is actually one other thing, because there's been a bit of confusion over this since the FLP has launched. You can switch back to the PQ route. I know that was, I think that wasn't always the case. I think there's been a change since that first launch. But if you need to, you can switch back to the PQ route. Again, even if it's just for the SCS at the end. But again, just make sure you discuss that with someone, just so you got a plan ahead of time.
No, there's been nothing more frustrating if you're studying for your SCS and then your subscription ends and your exam credit then disappears, which would be very, very annoying for a student. So yeah, obviously plan your subscription. So ideally, you want to be starting a subscription at the start of March, the start of June, the start of September, or the start of December, because then you get your 4 windows for each respective year. Okay, Thomas, that's been great. Thank you for your input. Some good advice there, and obviously someone who's been through the process. Is always great to hear your view. So thanks for taking the time. Appreciate that.
Oh, my absolute pleasure.
No, thank you. There's plenty more to explore about the topic via the show notes, so you can get them in the usual place within your smartphone, tablet, or the web browser on your computer. There's more information on our website, AICPA.com, or enroll.cgi.org. Thanks again to Thomas Broadley. We'll have another episode next month. So for now, thank you for your time, and goodbye.
This content is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered, and does not represent an official opinion or position of the AICPA, the Association, or CIMA. It is provided with the understanding that they are not engaged in offering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The AICPA, the Association, and CIMA make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to, and assume no responsibility for, the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.